Welcome, everyone. I'm Franklin Escobedo, the president of the Young Adult Library Service Association, and we're here this evening to honor our 2023 Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for young adult winners and finalists. I would like to take a moment to welcome our award-winning authors who are here with us this evening. We have our nonfiction winning authors, Tommie Smith and Derrick Barnes, and illustrator Dawud Anyabwile. Oh, sorry. And finalists Rex Ogle, Gail, Jarrow, and Marc Favreau. Unfortunately, Ariel Henley will not be able to join us this evening. She is sick and has no voice. I'd also like to thank the Excellence in Nonfiction Committee for all their hard work this past year. And I'm going to hand the program over to our YALSA 2023 Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adult Award Committee Chair, Allison Gray. Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin. First awarded in 2010, YALSA's Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults was created to honor the year's best nonfiction book published for teens. This year's books reflect the many superb autobiographies published in a variety of formats, as well as excellent books on historic pandemics and social justice. The committee found it extremely difficult to limit itself to a top 5 titles, as the quality of nonfiction for teens this year was truly impressive. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce my fellow committee members and thank them for all of their hard work throughout the year. They are Elizabeth Bast, Molly Detman, Katie Henderson, Lauren Hitton, Dana Hutchins, Pam Kranenberg, Bethany Martin, and Heather Richard. So on to the program. Our first nonfiction award of the evening goes to Rex Ogle for his book, Abuela, Don't Forget Me, published by Norton Young Readers, an imprint of W.W. Norton and Company. In his memoir, Free Lunch, Rex Ogle's Abuela features as a source of love and support. In this companion memoir in verse, Rex captures and celebrates the powerful presence of a woman he could always count on, to give him warm hugs and ear kisses, to teach him precious words in Spanish, to bring him to the library where he could take out as many books as he wanted, and to offer safety when darkness closed in. Rex, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, folks. I'm Rex Ogle, and it's an absolute honor to be here. I'm going to start us off by reading a small bit from my book in verse, Abuela, Don't Forget Me. This part is called Library. Pulling up to the large public library, Abuela glows with pride. This is the public library. I know it's a library. Library, she corrects me, her voice soft as a blue bonnet petal. Inside, white walls reach toward blue skies, seen through high glass windows, resting above shelf after shelf after shelf of book after book after book. My eyes grow wide, whites wider, pupils dilating, to take in all these stories, begging to be known. Can I read them all? I ask. Abuela smiles. Yes, if you work hard, you can do anything. If you can't tell, my abuela was an amazing person. She was raised in extreme poverty in Mexico, and books were a luxury that she didn't have. So it was only natural that she gravitated towards bibliotecas, especially after coming here to the United States, where she forged her way through college as a widow with 5 kids. She did so by spending every free moment at the ACU library, studying to get her bachelor's degree, followed by her master's. No easy feat for an immigrant. The library was easily her favorite place. She loved books on tape. She loved reading the newspaper. She particularly loved that everything was free. So from a young age, she instilled in me a love of reading. When I'd visit her or she'd visit me, we'd spend hours picking out books at the local library. It got to the point where when I was 6 or 7, that we would go in the morning and return to her house where I would sit cross-legged on her scratchy crimson carpet, reading for hours. I would take a short break to eat a bologna and cheese sandwich smeared with Miracle Whip that she'd make me. Then she'd make me wash my hands before returning to devour what books were left. Once I'd read everything, she would drive me back to the library in the afternoon to return the books and get more. And she did so happily. My book, Abuela, Don't Forget Me, is a coming of age marked by violence and dysfunction, but also celebrates the powerful presence of a woman I could always count on. It is very much a love letter to this special person who always encouraged me to be a better version of myself and took me to the library often. So it means the world that Yalsa and ALA would recognize my writing. I know if she were here, my abuela would be tickled pink to see that sticker on a book about her. Finally, I want to offer a huge thanks to Yalsa, ALA, and the panelists, and all of you librarians out there making a difference. Just like my abuela, you changed lives for the better. I hope you remember that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rex. Our next nonfiction award goes to Gail Jarrow, author of American Murderer, The Parasite That Haunted the South, published by Calkins Creek. Imagine microscopic worms living in the soil. They enter your body through your bare feet, travel to your intestines, and stay there for years, sucking your blood like vampires. You feel exhausted. You get sick easily. It sounds like a nightmare, but that is what happened in the American South during the 1800s and early 1900s. Welcome, Gail.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you to the Yalsa Committee for placing American Murder among the finalists for the Excellence in Nonfiction Award. Congratulations to all the finalists with me tonight, especially the winners. I want to thank my longtime editor, Carolyn Yoder, for her support, advice, and editing skills as I wrote this book. I'm also grateful to the team at Calkins Creek Astra Books for Young Readers for doing everything it takes to turn a manuscript into a book and then get it into the hands of readers. And I have to thank my husband, Robert, for listening to my sometimes gross and disgusting dinner conversations about hookworms. He also patiently listened to me read my manuscript aloud, chapter by chapter, as I wrote them. He isn't a historian or a scientist, so his questions about the content helped me identify places where I needed to explain better for my readers. American Murderer is the third in my medical fiasco series. The first was Blood and Germs, about Civil War medicine. The second was Ambushed, about the assassination and death of President James Garfield, a book which won this award last year. American Murder is about a little-known medical fiasco in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Millions of Southerners were weak, sick, and died, and no one knew why. In fact, most doctors didn't even realize these people were sick. The reason for their illness was this creature magnified 1,600 times. The book's title is the English translation of its Latin name. Now, part of my story is unraveling the origins of a stereotype. Some Southerners were considered lazy and stupid. Yet the reason they seemed that way traced back to this half-inch intestinal parasite that sucked their blood, affecting them physically and cognitively. The hookworm story helps young readers understand that it often takes time for scientific discoveries to become medical miracles. An accurate diagnosis technique, effective treatments, and prevention of a disease can take years. And along the way, there can be distrust of doctors and science in general, sometimes with good reason. An important outcome of the American hookworm epidemic was the organization formed to fight it, the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission. Funded by John D. Rockefeller, it combined the efforts of scientists, doctors, and state and federal governments to diagnose, cure, and prevent hookworm cases in the American South. This collaboration established a model for government-private partnerships to solve public health problems. A century later, that model continues to tackle diseases, including COVID-19, and it has brought us vaccines, diagnostic tests, and therapeutics. While hookworm disease is no longer a problem in this country, it still affects people throughout tropical and subtropical regions of the world. That's hundreds of millions, perhaps 1 billion people, though it's difficult to count all the cases. And just as the parasite affected so many American Southerners more than 100 years ago, it sickens those people today and impacts their country's economy and progress. But without better sanitation in these areas, it's a disease that's difficult to prevent. Despite all of this, even the devastating fiascos that I write about have led to medical advancement and better care. Most of all, as a writer, I want to leave my readers with hope about the future. Thank you again to the committee for shining the light on nonfiction and affirming its importance in the lives of teens. I'm honored that American Murderer is among those books recognized this year. And thank you, librarians, teachers, and parents out there for sharing nonfiction with the young readers in your life.
Thank you, Gail. And I hope you didn't make your husband look at the photographs during dinner.
Yeah, he saw those too.
Oh dear. Our next award goes to Michael Eric Dyson and Marc Favreau, authors of Unequal, A Story of America, published by Little Brown Books for Young Readers, a division of Hachette Book Group, Inc. The true story of racial inequality and resistance to it is the prologue to our present. You can see it where we live, where we go to school, where we work, in our laws, and in our leadership. Welcome to Marc Favreau.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thanks to the committee for this incredible nomination and to be part of this wonderful group of writers. My co-author, Professor Michael Eric Dyson, really regrets not being able to be here tonight. He had a commitment as a teacher. He's a wonderful lecturer and teacher, and that's where he is tonight. I want to thank him for working with me on this project. This was our first collaboration as writers. It won't be our last. And it's been just a really joyous and incredible journey together to write together and to write for young readers. So our book, Unequal, it tells the story of America through the eyes of people who experienced white supremacy firsthand in all of its many forms, and then decided to fight back against it, to create a more equal and a more just society. So every chapter in our book tells the story of a different battle, in a sense, between the forces of equality on one hand and the forces of inequality on the other. And by telling all of these stories together, we hope to kind of fit together all the puzzle pieces that make up the present day. When we began writing together, we were committed to focusing each chapter on an individual person and an individual story to give readers like a deeper understanding of the heroes of this movement for racial equality in America. Some of them famous, but many of them not. And what really struck us was how different all of these people were, how so many of them were just ordinary people who did extraordinarily brave things. For example, a teenaged Mary Church Terrell refusing to accept the new rules of the segregated South in the 1880s, or a sharecropper named Ned Cobb standing up for the dignity of his own work, for his right to carve out an independent existence in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow, or Polly Murray putting her brilliant legal mind to work at dismantling the law of segregation at a time when women were all but absent from the legal profession. And many decades later, Catherine Flowers making the connection between civil rights and clean water in her own home of Lowndes County, Alabama, and bringing this urgent issue to international attention. So our book kind of means to show how the shapes of inequality changed and moved over time, but also how millions of people responded, pushing back in whatever way they could, not always winning, but always trying, keeping the flame of democracy burning. Because to us, that's really what this story is about. It's not just an African-American story, though Black people are at the heart of it. We call it a story of America, because if there is inequality in America, then all of us live in an unequal nation. All of us live in a place where democracy needs work. I'll just end by noting that Michael and I together conceived of this book in the summer of 2020, during that great uprising for equality in America, when it seemed to us that so many people were hungry for understanding all the forces, past and present, that have created the society we live in today. But little do we know that we ended up writing it during the backlash. And I don't think any of us, either of us, I should say, foresaw what has really been like a frontal assault on the teaching of African-American history in Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, and elsewhere. And also, I am sad to say, inside the College Board itself, the very institution that's supposed to ensure that young people are exposed to the full breadth of knowledge about America and American society. So, at what is a challenging moment for books like this, we're so proud to have this acknowledgement from YALSA, to have the support of our editor, Lisa Yaskowitz, and her excellent colleagues at Little Brown, and really to have the encouragement of librarians around the country who we know are at the front lines of preventing these efforts to suppress what young people learn about our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And our final award of the evening goes to our 2023 Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adult winners, Dr. Tommie Smith, Derrick Barnes, and illustrator Dawud Anyabwile for their book, Victory Stand, Raising My Fist for Justice, published by Norton Young Readers, an imprint of W.W. Norton and Company. In his first ever memoir for young readers, Dr. Tommie Smith looks back on his childhood growing up in rural Texas through to his stellar athletic career, culminating in his historic victory and Olympic podium protest. I am so pleased to welcome Tommie, Derrick, and Dawud.
Thank you very kindly. Thank you to the YALSA committee, librarians, teachers for sure, and students without missing a step. There's many things said in the book. Great illustrator. He drew me much more pliable physically than I really was, and I'm happy because of that. The actual writer, all the mental captions that was illustrated by his voice made this application one of the finest. And of course, I have love for it of myself, dealing with the realities that a lot of people don't understand about Tommie Smith in the Olympic Games getting there. These two young professionals brought it to light through caricature and mental stenography. I'd like for them to give a little piece of their professionalism. Derrick?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank the YALSA committee. I've been a media awards nerd for like 20 years. Just watching that thing on, Monday morning and hearing all the cheers and the yells from, all the librarians. Shout out to all the librarians that are watching right now, and just dreamed about our names being called, so it's such an extreme honor to be able to work with Dr. Smith, work with underground superstar comic book legend and my brother Dawud Anyabwile. It's been such an honor to work with both of you guys. Back in 2018, I took a flight from Charlotte to Atlanta, Georgia, and rented a car, and I was headed to Dr. Smith's house. I don't think I ever told you this, but I pulled up in the driveway, but I came bare. I didn't have anything with me, you know what I mean? I didn't have a bottle of wine, I didn't have flowers or nothing. So I went to Food Lion, which is around the corner, and I got those flowers because your wife was saying that she was making a lunch, and I was kind of nervous. I'm not one of those guys that gets nervous, by meeting people, but I was actually meeting the Tommie Smith. So I came back, I had the flowers, the food was smelling good, and you and I went down to his man cave where there's so much. It was like a museum down there. There's art fan work. There's fan artwork. There's pictures of him with dignitaries from all over the world, athletes. If you name him, he probably has a picture with those gentlemen trophies. And when I sat down with him to take notes, I was thinking, man, this brother's probably tired of talking about the 1968 Olympics. But when we sat down there, and we sat down there the whole day, he really opened up, and it felt like he had talked about, this was his first time talking about it. And if you've read through the book, the first chapter is called Country Boy. Because up until that moment, I hadn't done too much research about Tommie Smith. I thought he and John Carlos were actually Black Panthers that had qualified for the 1968 Olympics. I didn't know. Brother Carlos is just an uptown boy from, Harlem. And Tommie Smith, after sitting with him for like an hour or so, was just another country boy from Texas, And it was so awesome listening to him talk about his family. He was one of 12 from a hardworking sharecropping family and a very hardworking parents. And after like maybe 3 or 4 hours, I kind of realized this needs to be a graphic novel. And I also realized the value of this story, that it doesn't matter where you come from. You don't have to come from a family of civil rights leaders or, a famous family, but you utilize what God has given you. He's a lifelong learner, lifelong reader, educated himself on the history of this country, and utilized his God-given ability, which was speed. You just think about it. He had to finish first place in order to be on that podium. He had to. So it's like it was written almost. It's like it was written for him to actually be there that day. And so I encourage every librarian that's watching this right now, and every single writer, all the finalists, you all continue to tell your truth, continue to educate your students, continue to share books with them that talk about the real history of Black people in this country. Dr. Smith has provided us with the most iconic sports protest image in the history of this country. And again, it is my honor to call you a brother, call you a friend. Dawud, thank you. And hopefully we get to work together again. And I'm just in awe. I'm just in awe. And victory stand to the world. Please share that with your students and keep up the good fight, y'all. Keep up the good fight.
Yes, I'm Dawud Anyabwile, illustrator, Victory Stand. First want to say thank you to Allison, the whole YALSA committee, everyone involved, everyone at Norton Reader, who's been very supportive of this publication, sending us all around the country on different promotional tours and things of that nature. What I would like to say about this book is that my background has been in like animation, comic books. I worked at like major production studios from Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, music videos, things like that for decades. And I would still say that I think this is the most like phenomenal project I worked on, like the value of it, what it represents. And, just the fact that I would tell people to work with a living legend. I had the opportunity to work on a book with Kwame Alexander, Becoming Muhammad Ali, which I love that as well, by and James Patterson. And the thing about that is that I didn't get to meet Muhammad Ali. I didn't know what do you think? You know what I mean? And with Victory Stand, when I got to meet Dr. Smith and his wife Dolores, and got to sit in their home like Derrick did, and he showed me his basement, and got to see all his medals and awards, and he's been iconic image in our home growing up in Philadelphia since I was a little fella. So here it is, I'm standing face to face with him, about to illustrate his life story. So talk about, was the pressure on? The pressure was on. But I think he made it really, he relaxed me, when we sat down to talk. And I was just asking him about his life. You know, he was showing me the pictures and things of that nature. And to do a biography it's not really something I would say is simple, because you're dealing with someone's life. You know, you can't just make it up like a comic book or something else. You have to adhere to the guidelines. So what I liked about this was that I got to deal with helping to tell a story and lock his story into history for children for generations. Because when you tell a lot of people, hey, you heard of Tommie Smith, John Carlos, and people say, oh, no, I'm not sure. And you just say, you know, the brother with the fist on the Olympic stand. And then everybody said, oh yeah, but they don't know his life story. And to be able to be one of the people to contribute to the life story that now gives clarity to the legend. And the fact that he's still here now. That's what I tell people, like, hey, if you get a chance, come out to the book sign and shake his hand. He's here. You know what I mean? And for me, I say the book was a spiritual journey, you know, because when I worked, you know, I wasn't there those decades ago, but I felt it. And I would say to all the artists out there, you know, a lot of artists who contribute, you know, their work for future generations. I understand what we have to go through in terms of channeling stories, channeling images, working with a writer, you know, pairing up with the right writer. And it's not easy all the time to tell these stories and to capture it. So, you know, so that moment when Dr. Smith got to see the book, and, you know, I hope it's okay for me to say, he said it brought a tear to his eye. I was like, my job here is done, you know. So I really appreciate it. I mean, that was really that was the victory to me, you know, the fact that that's all I really needed to know, was that he enjoyed the process, and the brother Derrick Barnes for bringing me on. And you know, it was a dynamic team, and I really enjoyed myself. And I'm really grateful that the book is getting this type of acknowledgement, because when I'm working on a project, it's like I'm just head down in the trenches, you know. And then when the book finally comes back, I can kind of lay on the bed and look at it and really get to take it in and appreciate it. So that's really all I have to say. I really appreciate this evening, and it was a pleasure for me to take time out to meet all of you.
Dr. Smith, did you have anything to add?
They kept me faithful. I call them my two sons now, you know. They eat a lot, but that's okay. And my main caption about these two guys is faith. They really stick to what they believe. The faith, the subjects of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. They don't see it, but they work very hard, and just they get ready to look over their shoulder, they see the image in their face. One is an image of an architect, the other mental attitude. And both you guys, you're okay. And I said, okay, tomorrow you'll be better. No, I get you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you so much to YALSA's Excellence in Nonfiction finalists and winner. We're now going to move on to the question and answer portion of the event. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can in the time remaining. And our committee members are going to each ask a question. We're going to start with Molly Detman, who's going to ask Rex a question. Molly?
Thank you. All right. Hi, Rex. So my question's for you. And so I'm a high school librarian, and I actually have used your books. I've used excerpts in lessons and things. And usually what happens is, like, I use it, and then at the end of the hour, the kid's like, can I check this out? And I'll be like, let me make a copy real quick for the excerpt. And then, like, yes, please check it out. I have all the copies. But for, like, free lunch is really popular. But I have so many students who sometimes are like, I mean, they haven't read in a while, or they're just like reluctant readers. I mean, they may gravitate more to like graphic novels, but they also love, like, verse novels can really help engage readers too, because of like the way the work, like, it's not as intimidating. There's a lot of white space. So what made you decide to write Abuela Don't Forget Me as a novel in verse?
Well, my abuela developed dementia about 7 years ago after she retired, and her memory started going rather rapidly. So I wanted to write down as much as I could remember about her. And so I took everything, all my memories from my perspective, and I wrote them down. At first, it was just for her. It was a love letter. I wanted to write down stories about her pecan tree. I wanted to write down stories about her driving me to work. I have thousands of stories, and I wanted to get as many down as possible on paper. The more I put together, I'd call her, I'd read them to her. When I went to visit, I would read them to her. Sometimes she would remember, sometimes she wouldn't, but I needed to make it short. So verse was just the easiest way to do that. I also know that there's a lot of great books out there in verse. I read those as research and really just fell in love with writing verse. It was the first time I'd written something like poetry since I was in junior high school, when I used to write, and I would get picked on by the older kids for writing poetry. And I put down my pen and never wrote poetry again until I started writing this. And honestly, it was like returning to a craft that I had long forgotten, and I thought I'd forgotten how to do it, but it just came back to me, and it was honestly a very rewarding experience. So I'm glad that young readers are tapping into it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and Pam, you have a question for Marc.
Okay, so this is kind of a spur of the moment. I didn't check my emails till about an hour, so yeah, sorry about that. Going to be odd question. Okay, so when we were reading the book, we were, I guess, more amazed at the people that you selected for this book, like the lesser known people. How did you find them, I guess?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I mean, we read a lot of other books, like books like this are built on the work of so many other people. We talked a lot together. Michael Eric Dyson has a really immense kind of historical knowledge himself. And I think, like when we thought about how to structure the book, he sort of just said to me, like, it can't be that we're looking at people doing something. It has to be seen through their eyes, right? It has to be seen through people as agents of their own history. So in part, to be honest, like there's two things going on at once, trying to find the most compelling stories, and then the most compelling stories by people who have left a record of their own lives in their own words, which we thought was very important. So just a lot of sifting through the historical record. And, secondly, part of what we're trying to do is talk about the present and all the aspects of inequality, whether it's the way that where you can live is affected by race, or what you eat, or your health, or where you go to school. And so, we were trying to kind of pull out the lesser known heroes of those particular movements. But so it was more art than science, and a lot of considerations. But we could have written a much longer book, because these are just representative characters that we felt were you just sort of had to. And some of them, if, for example, if you know the life story of Pauli Murray, we just from day one said, like, she has to be in there, or Nate Cobb, who in his own memoir used to be known as, was dubbed Nate Shaw by the man who recorded his story. We both knew that very well. We knew we had to put him in there, but I don't have a better answer for you than that. Other than that.
Okay, and Lauren, I believe you have a question for Tommie, Derrick, and Dawud.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here. It's so exciting to exist in the same virtual space as all of you amazing authors. But one of the remarkable things that stood out to us about Victory Stand is how it connects sports and activism. Many, both then and now, feel that politics has no place in sports. How does your book fit into that discussion? And what do you hope young people, especially young Black athletes, will take from this book about that topic?
Okay.
Being the father of 4 boys, and they've all played every single sport that you can think of, from kickball, to lacrosse. And I have one son who's a very good athlete. He's a football player at Fayetteville State here in North Carolina. And so I've always been a fan of football, and we've talked about making it and playing in that league on Sunday, and how if you are a Black man in this country who is well-read, you have an obligation not just to continue to entertain, this country. I always tell my boys, we've entertained this country long enough. So we are obligated to use our platforms, no matter what, I don't care if you're an NBA star or MMA boxer, football player. If you are a Black person, if you're a Black athlete and you're well-read, you have an obligation, because people like Tommie Smith, Muhammad Ali, rest in peace, Bill Russell, they have laid the groundwork for, today's modern athletes. And most of the athletes come from urban areas. They come from mostly poor families. And just because you become famous or you become wealthy does not take your Black card away from you. You still have family members that still live in these areas, that still live in these downtrodden areas. So you have an even stronger obligation, to speak up whenever, on issues, like police brutality or, violence against Black women. You have an obligation, and they should all salute Dr. Smith for doing what he did, sacrificing not only, his career or his life, but, that was his last race that he ran in the 1968 Olympics, which really shocked me once I did my research. He never raced again. It's pretty similar to what's going on, with Colin Kaepernick, not being able to play the sport that he loves, only, simply because he knelt. And so I would like to see more young Black athletes take up this mantle, use your platform, speak out without fear, because you owe an entire generation of athletes like Dr. Smith. And I always be grateful, to him for that.
I'd like to chime in too. And I would like to kick this up a notch too, in terms of the athlete activists, to thinking in terms of seeing ourselves not compartmentalized as a human being. You understand? Because I don't run track and do all these incredible things on the sports side. However, I've always considered myself like a visual revolutionary, because art was my superpower. So when we think about ourselves, a lot of times we introduce ourselves, hey, I'm such and such, I'm a doctor, I'm such and such, I'm a dentist, I work at this, I work at that. But that's not the totality of who you are. That's just what you do. So if we think of ourselves in a holistic, like the full circle of our being, then we don't separate sports from our humanity. We don't separate the job I work at from my responsibility. And the talents that we have, like I say, that is our superpower. That when we tell our stories, we're actually advancing and propelling concepts that exist within our heart to the world, that gives guidance to children and people who may not have guidance. They look at your book, they hold your book as that thing that helped me to survive. You know what I mean? And if we start looking at our talent and looking at our skill sets as something that's powerful, that can shift a paradigm, then that's what's going to happen. So even in our music, when we're writing music and writing songs, are we writing this with intention of changing and shifting of the things that we want to improve in society? So what Dr. Smith did, he was fastest man in the world. You can't compete with that at that time and until now. But what made it even more dynamic was that he flexed that power with the totality of him as a man, which made it stand out. Somebody else could have been the fastest man in the world, which would be great. But when you see somebody stand on something that's like, wow, he fought for me. He represented for me. I get winded at running half a block. You know what I mean? Nobody's gonna listen to me, but they'll listen to him, but he's representing for me. You see what I'm saying? Somebody else, they may feel that, hey, Dawud, I can't draw like you, but you drew something that represented for me. Somebody else, I can't write a song, but they sang a song that represented for me. So that's when we have to see ourselves as we're more than just this one thing that we introduce ourselves to the world as. We're a plethora of things. So, you know, I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Very well done, both of you guys. To tie this with a bow, of thanks to you and to the committee. I call it From the Cotton Fields in East Texas, Texarkana, Texas, cotton fields, to the victory stand. Now, from that point through my competing at San Jose State University, not saying very much while I was competing, I was thinking the whole time. There were those people who asked me on a daily basis, Tommie, why don't you say something? Why don't you give thanks to the starter on the finish line, the starting line? But that starter didn't run the race. So I was figuring out a time in my life, where can I find solace in the life that I have lived? And there are many things in the book that Derrick wrote and Anyabwile described physically. And what you've heard is in the book. And it's also in me. So it's interesting for me to read this every once in a while, to read and find out that's me. That's me. He drew of his own feeling of how he felt about talking to me, about wondering my trek from the cotton fields with 7 sisters and 4 brothers to the victory stand with the world. And sometimes it frays my mind to understand that you could have been completely destroyed before you got there, because there were so many people who tried it before I got there. But here I am. And don't ever believe that overcoming is a dead issue. Overcoming is very live. It's very poignant in the lives of all of us. You writers, readers, dignitaries of self, SELF, is a growth in this society. Keep on going. Keep on putting your stories out there so other people can understand that there's more to living than eating the breakfast every morning.
Thank you very much. Okay, Katie Henderson has joined us and she has a question for Gail.
Hi, Gail.
Hi, Katie.
We were so grossed out by American Murderer. And a funny thing in our discussions about the book, I just wanted to mention, when we were reading Victory Stand and we saw the illustrations of Dr. Smith as a child running barefoot in the fields, we were like, no, don't do that, barefoot. Anyway, that's a sidebar. My question is, obviously the books that you write require an immense amount of research. So once you've selected a topic, where do you start with your research, and how much of your work is research versus the actual writing and revising?
The research is definitely the majority. Because I read so many things, and of course I can't use most of it. I'm just writing a book that's going to be 150 pages at the most. and I just learned so much. But this is part of why I do what I do, because I love learning. But where I start is with the best secondary sources I can find from academic sources that have written about the topic, and then follow the bibliographies, the footnotes, to the primary sources. And I'm lucky because I do have access to a university library and the databases that they have access to. So anything that I want, I find. And I go back and I read, for American Murderer, I was reading medical articles and medical books from the 1800s all the way into the early 1900s. I really rely a lot on primary sources. One of the problems I think that takes me the most time is figuring out what I've read is accurate and what isn't, because when you start looking at secondary sources, there's so many errors. People repeat the same error over and over and over. And that's why I go back to the primary source. And I want to get it right because I'm writing for kids and they deserve the facts correctly written and researched. So I think that is why I put so much time into my research. It's because I want to get the facts correct and I want to find interesting information. And a lot of the things in that book, I wouldn't have found if I hadn't really dug into the primary sources, including newspapers from way back, 1900, to find stories about people that made it to the newspapers, just little articles about a family and something that happened to them. Those are the kinds of tidbits that I look for. And it does take time, but it's fun. I really enjoy it, and I hope my readers enjoy reading it.
Thank you, Gail. A member of our audience, Annette Goldsmith, has a question for Mark. You mentioned that you will be collaborating with Michael Eric Dyson again. Are you working on another project now?
We are working on a second book together at the moment. And it's a similar book. The title is Represent, and it's specifically about the long struggle for voting rights in America, but for all people. Starting with the idea that if you really look at what the revolution did in 1776 to 1787, it really left most people outside of the circle. So it's the story of how everyone else has fought to get inside of the circle and continues to fight too. So that book we're collaborating on in the moment, and will be out in the we hope in the early fall of 2024. And somehow in the interim, my own single authored book, which is about the story of Pearl Harbor, entitled Attacked, will publish in November of this year, also by Little Brown.
Great, something to look forward to. I believe Heather has a question for everyone. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if you could keep your answers a little bit brief, but Heather, go ahead.
Thanks for being here, everyone. It's really exciting to get to celebrate these great books that we kind of kept under wraps for so long. So my question actually comes out of a brief passage in Rex's book where he buys a journal at a bookstore, and his mother says to him, "Why would you spend $20 on a journal, on a book with no words in it?" And he said, "Because I want to put my words into it." So my question is really for everyone. We know that we are the librarians. We're going to provide the books for everybody for free. So the question really isn't about should we spend $20 on your book or a blank book, but the question is really, who encouraged you to write in your own blank book, or Dawud, in your case, to draw in your own blank book?
I guess I can go first. Well, my inspiration came out of my home, particularly my parents. You know, when I was a little fella, you know, my mother hung up the pictures on the refrigerator, and you know, I was the greatest artist in the world, as far as I can tell. And you know, as I grew, you know, it was cultivated. The arts was cultivated in the home, so I was never put down or really told that, you know, my work didn't matter. It was always something that, at least in my bubble, you know, I was doing something
Can't put me on blank screen. Come back.
Oh, okay. I was doing something that had relevancy to it. So then when I actually got out into the world, you know, you have that confidence of knowing that you have something to say. And so, you know, then you start gaining experiences. You see, you know, where your weak points are here, you know, where you got to polish up things and get a little bit better over there. You just start learning life skills, but that's where mine began.
So we'll just go in order of how you're appearing on my screen. Mark, you're next.
Yeah, I'm gonna Maya's really specific answer. I've worked my whole career in book publishing as an editor at a company called The New Press, and a lot of my own authors have inspired me to think about writing myself. But it wasn't until I was well into my 40s that someone I know very well and is very dear to me. It's an agent, literary agent I share with Michael Eric Dyson named Tanya McKinnon, actually gave me the encouragement to think that I could write, which seems sort of odd for someone who works in the writing field. And I don't think I understood till like that point in my life what encourage means, right? Just to sort of give you the courage to imagine that you could do something. And it wasn't until that conversation I had with her, I thought, yeah, maybe I could write a book. And this is my fourth, and I'm not stopping. So I think I do credit Tanya with that. You know, there's a lot of other inputs we all have in our life. It's always that one that pushes you over the precipice. So that was her.
Gail?
I've been writing since I learned how to spell. And I think it was partly because I had a family that encouraged reading. And I think I was one of the people, and maybe some of you all are like this, I was one of the people that I just had to put words on paper. So my thoughts had to go on paper. And once I started reading a lot, I imitated some of the authors. You know, I'd read a story and then I try to write one like it. I mean, it was just something that naturally happened when I was a kid. And I think I was lucky because I had teachers that gave me opportunities to write things and probably gave me praise that encouraged me to do it again. But, you know, I used to write just on my own for fun throughout my entire school career. Now, I did not go in that direction when I went to college, and right after college, I did other things. But I always was writing, and it just took me a while to figure out how I could make a career out of it. And I'm really glad I have done that, but it's just something that's in me. It's the way I see the world. It's the way I express myself. So that's really why I do what I do.
Thank you. Rex?
For me, I just always gravitated towards reading. Reading was a way of escaping my life. I was dealing with poverty. I was dealing with violence. I was dealing with a lot of stuff at home. So for me, it was an escape, reading. And eventually that led to writing. And I discovered that by writing down my thoughts, I felt that they were somehow validated, that my life had meaning and that it was important that I write down my story. I never thought that I would share it with anyone. It was always for me. But as I got older, I realized that I wanted to be a writer desperately. And I pursued that with every fiber of my being for years and years, despite lots of rejections. But through and through, I knew that I wanted to write down my stories, and I just kept going.
We're glad you did. Derrick?
Yeah, three very important women in my life. Of course, my mom barely graduated with a high school diploma. It's a country girl from Mississippi, and she worked as a CNA. She worked 2 jobs most of the time, but on Saturdays, she made it a point to always take me to the public library, starting at the age of 4. And I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of poetry, started writing when I was 10. And, you know, my mother's always been my biggest fan. The second person was my high school English teacher, Mrs. Rogers. Shout out to Miss Rogers. She was my freshman English teacher, and she was my AP senior English teacher. And everything I wrote was Pulitzer worthy, you know, to her. She was so encouraging and so loving. And we're actually friends on Facebook now, and I still shout her out because, you know, kids that create, you need adults in your life that really push you forward. And of course, my wife, we're going to celebrate 22 years of marriage. We met at a historically Black college, Jackson State. And most of us writers are very introverted, shy. So the spoken word poetry was very big. And I was too shy to kind of get up. One Saturday, we went to this spot called Highlight. This is in Jackson, Mississippi. And she came in and something, I don't know what it was. Maybe she just looked that good to me. I got up on stage. I didn't have pen or paper, and I did a freestyle. And she really gave me the encouragement from just a motivational passion standpoint. You know what I mean? Just the sight of her made me get up and have enough confidence to get up and just do a poem list like right off the dome. So it's been mostly Black women. You know, when y'all see me out at conferences, I have a button on my jacket that says, I love Black women because they've done so much for me. I don't know where I would be or what kind of writer I would be if it wasn't for the love of the Black women in my life. So.
Thank you. And Dr. Smith. You're muted, Dr. Smith.
Folks' brains. I'm having such a great time sitting here, listening to these young folks' brains. And so I can listen all night. I had a teacher, my favorite teacher, I guess was in the 4th grade, Mrs. Yinger, out of the Central Union Elementary School. In fact, she was a teacher that the principal had to send my sister, who was in the 7th grade, to the 4th grade when I was in the 4th grade to come out in her recess to run against her. And I had never beat my sister Sally before. If I beat my sister Sally running around the woodpile at home, that's where we stayed. And we had a woodpile because we had no electricity. We ran off of wood. She used to chase me, and I used to let her beat me because if I beat her, she would beat me up. And Sally stood like Tarzan, you know, so I didn't mess my sister Sally. This is one time I had that I could win a race and then be complimented for it. And I was. So that, listen to everybody there really, but especially my 2 young cohorts there telling their stories. But I say I was there. I lived that stuff back in the late 40s, early 50s. And I just love it. I mean, gee whiz, what can I say? Yeah, you got me almost in tears again, Dawud.
Well, on behalf of the committee, we'd all like to thank all of you for producing such phenomenal works of nonfiction for the young adults of our country this year and hopefully beyond. We were just so impressed by all of the works that you created. Thank you all very much, and I will turn it back to Franklin.
So again, I want to just thank everybody for coming this evening. I want to thank all the authors for being here, and I really want to thank the committee for their hard work and their dedication to YALSA. So, okay, you guys have a great evening, and thank you for joining us, and we'll hope to see you soon. So,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So long.